Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Josefine Jaynes of Readstown is a Democratic candidate in the 96th Assembly District. The primary is August 11th. Josephine, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I notice on your campaign websites, you talk about the need to help rural economies like the 96th District. If you're a member of the Assembly, what specific programs or changes would you push for, please?
So a crucial part of my campaign is the fact that a lot of times students go off to college and then they don't return home to our communities.
Yes.
So we need to work to attract those future generations to return home. And that really encompasses a lot of different things. Housing, which will in turn broaden the tax base and also help our schools, which are struggling with declining enrollment. We need broadband so that we can have people, this COVID experience, right now we're doing an interview over Zoom. It's really showed us how important the internet is. And that's just, the list can go on, but those are really some of the main focuses.
So broadband is a problematic in the 96th District, Josephine?
Yes. We saw it when schools closed due to the pandemic. A lot of students didn't have access to the internet or even cell service. So they had to do things with textbooks, and which the teachers, there's no communication there. So we have the risk of students not being educated due to the fact that they can't connect with their teachers and their fellow classmates.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's talk about some specific issues. If the governor's right and the pandemic is going to cut state tax collections by potentially $2 billion, that's with a B, as a member of the Assembly, you'd have some tough choices. You'd have to cut current spending or raise taxes and fees. How would you respond to that challenge?
I think the biggest issue is that we don't have a full understanding yet what the true economic impact this pandemic will have on our state. Okay. I don't think it's a clear cut or raise taxes issue. It's going to have to be a little bit of both. I think that we will have to use a little bit of the budget reserve, but that, we can't just use that. So we have to have a careful review of our spending. We have to be careful to not worsen the situation by laying off employees or cutting services that people are using right now. My biggest concern is the county governments who rely on sales tax. And with consumer spending down, the counties are responsible for services that are being really strained right now, such as the local health departments or nursing homes. And I think that ideas such as Senator Tammy Baldwin's, her new Jobs for Economic Recovery Act, ideas like that will have to be implemented as well.
Do you think local governments like counties that you just referred to, should they have alternative sources of revenue? Should local governments be able to levy a half-cent sales tax on their own to end some of the reliance on the property tax?
I think that's a conversation that we have to have with the local governments to best understand their issues and their concerns. I think pushing for things like housing could really widen the tax base and could help part of that issue as well.
Because Wisconsin is such a high property tax state, there are limits and caps on what school districts and local governments can levy in terms of property taxes, although referendums allow, if passed, you can exceed those. If you're a member of the Assembly, would you vote to keep those caps and limits in place on property tax levies?
In my district, I represent rural schools, and the formula right now does not help our rural schools. When those levies were imposed, or those caps were imposed in the early 90s, they were only meant to be in place for about 5 years, and they were supposed to rein in the districts that were exceeding spending. But really, they've impacted our low spending rural schools. I think we need to work with groups such as the Association for Equity and Funding and the Fair 8 Coalition to really talk with rural schools what would be best for them. And right now we see, if you look at the past 5 years, the trend with referendums, local people are choosing to raise their taxes. They've had to take that burden upon themselves to fund their schools, right, which I think should be a state, which should be an issue that the state government deals with, not these local governments.
Thank you. Okay, new subject. Americans know now how some police officers treat those in custody. We know a lot more than we did 3 months ago. The governor recommended a 9-bill package that would ban chokeholds, ban no-knock warrants, uniform training standards for police. Can you support the governor's package, or do you not think it goes far enough?
I would support the governor's package, but when it comes down to our local law enforcement officers, I think that they need to have an ongoing conversation with our local governments and the constituents that they are there to protect. I think that, we have to be careful. We need to make sure that police officers are held accountable for their actions. We also have to make sure that we don't totally strip the police officers of their duties. Well, I think oftentimes that police officers are put in situations that they're not trained for. We ask them to be, social workers. We ask them to be addiction counselors. And I think we need to put money into funding those services.
Well, a follow-up question. Many school districts are taking police officers out of high schools. Do you generally think resource officers should remain in high schools? Do you have a position on that?
I went to a high school that we didn't have one. A lot of these rural schools, they don't have one. Every once in a while, a county officer might come in if called upon, but and our schools have made it work. Obviously, I don't talk to the schools in the larger cities such as Madison and Milwaukee, but if we can get it done, I think that those metropolitan areas should be able to as well.
Thank you. What's your position on legalizing both medical and recreational marijuana?
I strongly support the legalization of medical marijuana. I think recreational marijuana is a great way. If it's taxed, we can look at the examples of other states like Washington, Colorado. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can follow what those states have done. I think that would also help our budget issue.
The debate over who should draw the next set of congressional and legislative boundary lines, the Constitution said the party in power in the Capitol should draw it, but the governors recommended a People's Commission, which would draw the lines and then forward them to the lawmakers to enact. Where are you on that issue, please?
I would support Governor Evers' nonpartisan redistricting commission. I think that gerrymandering has stripped our right to vote by pre-deciding the outcome. 51 out of the 72 counties in the state support fair maps. Of the counties that I represent, all 3 have passed a fair maps resolution, and Vernon and Monroe counties have both passed a referendum. So as their representative, I would fight for fair maps in Madison.
A question on a state taxing issue. We have no long-term funding plan for our highways. The governor last year recommended raising the gas tax. Would you support raising the gas tax, which is now 30.9 cents per gallon, hasn't been increased in 10 years, as a way for stable funding of highways, please?
I worry that increasing the gas tax will disproportionately affect low-income individuals, especially in my district where many people have to drive quite a far distance to go to school, to work. I think that an increased gas tax would not help my district.
Okay, understand. A couple questions on the pandemic. It not only squeezes state healthcare programs, as we've alluded to, it cuts revenues for state and local governments, but we've all seen the role that hospitals play in Wisconsin and nationally to fight COVID-19. If you're in the assembly voting on the next state budget, should hospitals have an even greater priority than they may have in the current budget, Josefine?
I think so, and not only our hospitals, but our nursing homes as well. With the Medicaid reimbursement issue, that was an issue before the pandemic. And I also think with hospitals, when someone recovers from COVID, that doesn't mean that they're fine. It means that sometimes they have lifelong issues, whether it be respiratory issues or a need for a lung transplant, issues like that our hospitals will also have to be facing. And I think that healthcare needs to be a priority.
So you think the state should expand Medicaid and take that additional federal money?
It's there. The money's there. Our state doesn't have to raise taxes. We don't have to. It's already there, and that's our money that we paid. I don't understand why we haven't taken it already. Oklahoma just took it. I think that is long overdue.
Another question on the pandemic. If a business follows all the CDC or WEDC rules and regulations to keep their employees and their customers safe, should they be immune from frivolous lawsuits?
I think that would be a hard thing to implement, because how do you ensure that they are following those? I think I'm really proud of the businesses in my district who have been coming up with creative solutions to this pandemic. No contact service and issues like that. I think that that people understand which businesses are practicing safety measures such as face masks and gloves and issues like that. And I think that people recognize that and will use those services more than ones that put their health at risk.
Thank you. Okay, a new subject. When a local government, school board or local government wants to approve a major public works project, should the bidding standards and requirements force them to give a preference to Wisconsin companies? The reason I ask is a study found in 2015, out-of-state contractors got $72 million in public works projects, but that went from $72 million in 2015 to $146 million in 2018. Should local governments have to give preferences to Wisconsin companies?
I have not seen the study that you just read off, but I think that Wisconsin companies should be given preference. We wanted to keep jobs in Wisconsin. We want to keep the money in Wisconsin. I agree with that.
Okay. We've talked about a bunch of issues. Any other issues that is central to your campaign that you want to mention right now, Josefine?
I just think that the biggest issue in my district is going to be the economic fallout from COVID, which is something that we don't even know how large that will be, because we haven't even peaked in this pandemic. And I think that that's just going to be an ongoing discussion, and we're going to have to listen to the scientists and health officials, and then work with our local governments to ensure that everyone comes out of this successfully.
As a recent high school student, what unique perspective would you bring to the state assembly?
A fresh new one. I don't have any ties, any strings attached. I'm just going to go down there with strong, independent leadership. And my generation is, the policies that are being created today will affect the world that my generation inherits. Some of our legislators are creating policy that they won't have to suffer the repercussions of. And I think that my generation deserves a seat at the table.
Okay, last question. You want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent in the August 11 primary?
I think the differences are obvious. I hope that voters listen to both of us, look into what we fight for, and I think come August, the voters will decide.
Thank you very much. Josefine Jaynes of Reedstown is a Democratic candidate in the 96th Assembly District. The primary is August 11th. Josefine, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you.
Stay safe and have a good day.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.